So it was just really neat to be able to kind of bring this topic to y'all. One of the reasons I wanted to make sure that we had today's topic was because, the world is uncertain. The world is just kind of crazy right now. And so I wanted to be able to provide an opportunity for us to talk about and work through some of the things you might be dealing with as an organization. So, changes in politics, changes in life, changes in situations make it hard to create strategic plans, kind of traditional strategic plans. And so, what I wanted to do was I wanted to provide a tool that we use called scenario planning to support making that happen in an easy way. And so, really, today is about how to create strategy in uncertainty using two different tools. One is a more traditional scenario planning tool, the other is a kind of more layman's tool, which is equally good. Really, is as things change, as things unexpectedly happen to you, whether that is an external force, whether that is an internal force, whether that's somebody retiring sooner than you thought they would. You have to make plans, and there's kind of best case, worst case scenario. As I mentioned, my name's Anthony Taylor. I'm the CEO and founder at SME Strategy. We've been around for 14 years, facilitating these important conversations for leadership teams around the world. So organizations, big and small, turn to us to facilitate, whether that's strategic planning conversations, whether that's conversations for problem solving with their leadership, or other implementation workshops to support them moving their plan forward. This is what we do day in and day out, and that's all we do. As I was preparing for, the webinar, I wanted to just share, a couple use cases that we've used scenario planning to develop strategy. So in 2018, our team was asked by the University of British Columbia to build a 10-year strategic plan by using scenario planning as the tool. We engaged, we did 30 different stakeholder engagement workshops, and every single group, there was 5 subgroups, and then teachers, faculty, students that went through the process of getting to share, where they saw the future, what are some of the uncertainties, and then we took all of that data and then compiled it into, what we saw was common, what we saw was uncommon, to try to use these plans to kind of hedge our bets and put together a plan. In 2020, when COVID came, the Department of Education of Alaska asked us to do some work with them to support their educators, the parents, the students, at how they're going to get back to work and how to make contingency plans for, how they're going to address COVID, the pandemic, reopening schools. And that was really a multi-month process of being able to lead those workshops to equip their educators, not to solve the problem, but to rather provide a framework to have more certainty in terms of what was going to happen and what needed to happen. And then, as I mentioned, most recently in 2024, we took a multinational, multi-billion dollar organization, worked their executive leadership through scenario planning and different kind of scenarios to help them try to figure out where they want to take, not necessarily where they want to take their organization, but to how to manage the guideposts along the way to determine what they're going to work on. So I'm really excited to share this with you. In terms of the format for today, we're going to go over 2 different approaches for scenario planning, and I will allow you to walk through this. So I encourage you to have a pen and paper, something to write on, so that you can really get into the needs and challenges of your organization specifically. We're going to talk a little bit about how to take all of that information, have those conversations with your teams, not just one time, but ongoingly, to make sure that you can implement it, because I anticipate that the uncertainty of 2025 is going to persist throughout the year, and then continue. And then I'll have an opportunity to answer some of your questions through a Q&A. So whether you're watching live on YouTube, which is what I'm looking at over here, or if you're joining through Zoom on the webinar today. So both of those things will be available. And then if you stay till the end, we'll have a little special bonus surprise for you that you can then use with your team. So I'm excited to do that. And yeah, that's great. So let's get into it. So really, there is changes. There are changes happening every day, inside and out. Whether it's political, and again, we have folks from all over the world on this call, so their political landscape is changing all of the times. Whether it's environmental, climate change. Vancouver, Canada, where I'm calling from today, had the coldest February, whatever date was ever. That is changing. And then you might have economic pressures, whether that's the increasing cost of goods, the increasing complexity of global trade or supply chains, or it could be, talent availability. And of course, things like AI, artificial intelligence, where to include it, where to not include it. And so there's so many different possibilities, options, permutations that sometimes it is paralyzing. In fact, the whole, premise for our alignment program, which is when we walk teams through our strategic planning, is that, sometimes you get paralyzed by choice. You have too many options, and instead of picking one confidently, you do nothing because you're afraid of the risk. And so, reason why I wanted to host today's webinar and share with you today is to give you at least some grounding in order to discuss these challenges with your teams and to take the next step forward to allow you to hedge your bets and make the best decision possible. So, as I mentioned, decrease risk, make better decisions. How? I want to give you tools for how to think about uncertainty. So this is not necessarily only strategic planning. If you think of strategy as making choices, how do we make the best choices? How do we make the best choices given that we don't always have the right information? I want to be able to give you a framework to use with your teams to talk through this, and then some, conversation starters to work on with your teams. So if at the end of today, you really like the content, you can of course show this to your team, but there is a video that I recorded in 2020, which is still relevant, and it's about 10-15 minutes long, walking through this scenario planning process that you could boot up at the beginning of your next team meeting. So if you're not familiar with scenario planning, there's fundamentally 4 steps to it. And in today's workshop, so workshop versus presentation, we're going to go through them together. And I'm hoping to hear from folks about what are the things that you have. So first, identify driving forces. What are the things that are going to impact your decisions? What are the things that are going to impact your organizations? What are the things that you need to be aware of as you start planning through this uncertainty? 2 is identify critical uncertainties. So within those driving forces, they might be 10, 15, 20 different ones, but we want to be able to hone them in. And so what we recommend is pick 2 of those critical uncertainties and use them as your X and Y axis on your grid here, which I'll show you later. From there, we'll unpack the plausible scenarios, and we'll do that relatively quickly because this could take several hours, but we're going to try to do it in about 20 minutes. And then looking at the implications and paths. What does this all mean? What do we need to be aware of? How do we need to consider that? So I'm going to leave this up for a quick second, and then I'm going to open up the whiteboard so that we can get into this. So identify driving forces. We're going to use a PESTLE analysis to do that. Identify critical uncertainties. Look at all the things that we might need to be aware of. Develop plausible scenarios, dig into it, and then discuss implications and paths. All right. So first, we've got this handy Zoom whiteboard that we're going to use. So everybody should be booting up here. So on your piece of paper, what I want you to write is this is called a PESTLE analysis. Okay. And I'm hoping, Jen, if folks can't see that, or if you see that, if you can't see it, you let me know, but it looks like you're in here too. Oh yeah. And I can see it on here. Nope. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. So what I want you to write is I want you to think of all of the, break down the trends that are happening in the world around you in each of these 6 areas. Okay, so first, before we try to solve anything, we want to look at what are some of the trends that we see happening or uncertainties that we see happening. And these trends or uncertainties should, in principle, fall under one of these 6 buckets. So it's potentially political, having to do with changes in politics. So if you're in Canada, US, in Japan, China, Kenya, all of you have a different political situation. And that political situation could be at the federal or country level. It could be at the state level. It could be at the city level. It could be at the municipal level. As in, there is a trend of this changing politically, and that might impact my organization one way or the other. There's economic, anything having to do with money. So, some of the trends are increasing tariffs, okay, or increasing costs. One of our clients is a trade association for folks that manufacture core parts for automobile assembly. Well, if either an aluminum tariff goes through or any import export tariff goes through, it's going to drastically impact the economics of these organizations. So, in some cases, it's an incident, but in a better case, it's a trend. So it's a rising tide or decreasing tide of, a consideration. Social, anything having to do with people. So, socially, there's an increasing and decreasing desire to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion. So we'll call it a polarization there. There is still, baby boomers or the older generation retiring. So there's increasing senior executives that are retiring. There's becoming an increasing knowledge gap as a function of that. There are younger workforces entering with a whole different set of education needs, wants, desires, thing that they prioritize. Technology, the cost of computing is going down. The increasing sophistication of computing is going up. What else? Technological, the rise of AI, the rise of deepfakes, the rise of information. KPMG just gave themselves bonuses, laid off a bunch of people. And the kind of analysis of that article was that they're going to look to reduce the bottom layer of labor by leveraging technology. Now, while that might produce short-term gains, it might not be sustainable long-term. So one of the trends could be an increasing transition, reliance, et cetera, on technology to do work. Legal, tons of laws that are changing, whether that's, laws that are supporting organizations, supporting your funding, et cetera. And then environmental, what are the changes environmentally that might impact your organization? So if you're in tourism, you might have, longer or shorter seasons. You might have more inclement weather events, climate change, just holistically, what's that doing to organizations? If you were in Florida in the past month or two, you might have had a really, really hot day, a really, really cold day, and everything in between, depending on where you were. And those changes don't happen all the time. And then, in North Carolina, South Carolina, where you had the flooding that happened there. So what you think of is as you look where you are and you look to the next year, 2 years, 3 years, what are the trends? What are the things that you see happening that might impact your organization? So the purpose of this is really to look at the winds of change versus to look at what's happened in the past. One example that I use frequently around this is, Blockbuster and Netflix. Blockbuster and Netflix were fundamentally in the same business. This was, 10, 15 years ago. One of them leveraged technology. One of them didn't. One of them is still very successful in business, and one of them is less so. And since I don't have the chat on for everyone, by the way, does the chat work, folks? If you're in this call, can you drop stuff in the chat? I'm unsure if that is a setting or not. So I'm going to just try to see if it's not, then I'll try to fix it. Jen posted stuff, but I want to see if the attendees can chat other than Jen. And if that's not the case, then maybe I will. Attendees can chat with everybody. Okay, let's try that again. Folks, can you test if the chat works? I know it works for Jen. There we go. Thank you, Ken. All right, wonderful. So thank you, everybody. Oh, you guys are great. Guys and gals, of course. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. In the chat, I want you to put down what are some of the trends that you see impacting your organization. So just pick one of these, one trend. So you don't need to just say political, economic, but say, hey, increasing cost of labor, or increasing reliance of AI, or trade barriers, or that kind of thing. I want to get a sense of where folks are at. Loss of federal funding. That's a huge one impacting our nonprofit clients and all nonprofits across the organization. Pressure on localization, AI technology impact, AI impact on higher education, policy changes for PSE sector, reducing diversity trainings. Oh yeah, that was huge. That was a sweeping change that had huge cascading impacts. Um, where does healthcare fit? It depends what about healthcare, Robin. So what about healthcare is the trend? Is it the increasing cost of healthcare, which could be one, the decreasing of people wanting to get into healthcare, which could be another. There could be increasing privatization of healthcare. There could be increasing healthcare tourism. Eldon, we haven't changed the slides in a while, so you're not missing anything. Increasing costs of labor, shortages of skilled workers, great. Copyright Act interpretations, so increasing differentiation, litigation on product offerings. Oh my goodness, I don't even know what that one is, but wonderful. So what's important as you go through these conversations with your teams is to be able to highlight what everybody sees. Like, what are the winds of change that people are seeing, and do your best to get them all on paper at the same time. Because if you all see the same thing, if you see different things, then it'll be challenging. So what you want to do is you want to try to get everybody, proverbially on the same page to be able to see what's next. Now let's see if I can do this here. Yes, I still want to continue. I'm not going to try to give y'all vertigo or whatever by changing it. So identifying driving forces. You did the first step. Okay. So next, what we're going to look at is we're going to identify the critical uncertainties. We're going to look at of what we have on here. What are the one or two trends that we want to focus on first? Okay. So we're not going to try to cover all of them right away, but we're going to try to capture one or two. Okay. So I'm going to stop the screen share again. Don't worry. We're doing exactly what we need to do. So I'm going to try to take from this list, and I'm going to see which ones I can use as the biggest extreme. So what I'm looking for is I'm trying to pick two trends that I can build extremes from. So what if we say increasing cost of labor? I'll use that as one trend. And then the other is it's not my favorite, but I will use it anyways. Uh, uh, Incorporation, acceptance of AI in business. Okay. Hopefully I didn't lose my, okay. So these are our two critical uncertainties that we're going to use for the sake of our scenario plan today. And again, this is one way to do it. You could likely come up with, as you have, 10 or 20 different trends. And so now what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to identify our extremes. We're going to try to identify the scenarios that we have here, okay? So in this scenario, I'm going to say full acceptance, integration of AI. Okay. For the sake of this exercise, I'm considering this basically like 3 years down the road. Okay. I'm not necessarily thinking today, tomorrow. I'm going to give a different tool that might be better for short term. Now, in this case, we're going to say zero acceptance of AI. Okay, so nobody wants AI. I have not watched whatever the Terminator movie is, so I don't have any kind of like reference point there. Now, for many of you that have put things like DEI, public health, federal funding, I would use a trend like full federal funding, like unlimited money for federal funding, and zero money for federal funding. At the other extreme, I would put would be something like 100% full acceptance, embracing of diversity, equity, inclusion as a foundation of our society, some version of that. And zero acceptance of diversity, equity, inclusion in society, in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. The reason is we're wanting to look at the full extremes of what is possible because then reality will live in the extremes. If we can figure out where the extremes are, we can figure out where we're at and we can go from there. Um, Difficulty attracting volunteers, not necessarily a trend. It could be an internal thing. So I would make that as a trend. Everybody wants to volunteer because they see it being valuable, and nobody wants to volunteer because they, don't have the time. So increasing cost of labor. Let's make this a trend like uh, by 5% per year. And again, this is all subjective. So what I'm trying to say here is this is a slow cost of labor increase. And then over here, where's my text box? That's not what I wanted to do. There we go. And the reason I didn't populate these, in case you're wondering, is because I wanted to show you how easy it is to actually do on paper. So in this case, we have a slow rising cost of labor, and we have a very fast cost of labor. Now that could be because, healthcare costs or competition or whatever reason. So now that we have our worlds mapped out, you can see that there's four potential different scenarios that we see looking into the future. One is where there's full acceptance and integration of AI and increasing cost of labor. So that's this world over here. There is a world where there's full acceptance integration of AI, but our labor costs are only increasing by 5% per year. There's increasing costs of labor by 5% a year with no acceptance of AI. And there's increasing costs of labor by 100% and no acceptance of AI. So just in the chat, can everybody tell me if you got your four worlds written down? And I know that it's kind of open to interpretation. This is, sub perfect, but just as a means of trying to get you to start thinking of alternate realities, alternate scenarios. And then Jen, if what I asked was weird, then you can just explain that for me, but we'll see. So everybody can put in the chat. Looks like the chat still works. Do you have your four worlds? Do you have your four scenarios? Were you able to put your alternate realities together? Excellent. Nina's there. Claire's there. If you're still working on it, I'll give you a minute or two. Excellent. Okay, while everybody's working on this, I have very little willpower. So if you stick around to the end, I'm going to give you a workbook to do all this. So it's a paint by numbers workbook. It's a template. You can like walk through this with your team. It'll give you some like step-by-step hints on how to do this. It's awesome. I'm really happy that we've built our like workshops on it. So if you stick around to the end, I'll drop the link in there for you. Okay. All right. Wonderful. So now what we want to do is we want to describe the worlds. Okay. So some of you might be just working on this. So we'll call this 2020. Let's call it 2027. That's probably far enough out for us. Okay. Now I haven't thought this through in the sense that I haven't put these things together because I wanted to show you how fluid this could be. Because when you do a workshop like this with a team, you don't know how it's going to play out. You could prepare for what you think the scenarios are going to be, but it's not always easy. So if in 2027, there was a full acceptance integration of AI and increasing costs of 5% per year, what would I think that would mean for, let's say, a private enterprise? Okay. Or just what would that mean for somebody? So I would say probably increasing profits, I would bet. I would say suffering employees. Now, before I keep going further, remember how we did this PESTLE analysis earlier? So all of these trends, you could take these trends that you saw and then drop them into these worlds here. So you could do a pestle within here. So if I said politically, what would it look like in 2027 if this was the world? Economically, what would it look like if this was the world? Socially, what would it look like if this was the world? Technologically, what would it look like if this was the world? So that gives you an opportunity to kind of like bring it back in to say, hey, what are some of the considerations? So that's like my heuristic as how I think about this. So technologically, I would say rapid innovation. I would probably also say low quality, maybe. Again, I'm not right about these things, and so you don't need to be worry about being right. Increasing cost of labor was only 5%. Um, Probably higher competition. I'm also not good at writing for good humans, as in we know that the technology can do the work. What about the like people element, the culture element? So you're talking about them as like humans versus people. It's kind of like robotic, but it's another story. What else would be a trend here? Legal, um, new laws governing tech, and probably laws that make people suffer. Uh, Growing health disparity, maybe health innovation, uh, non-profits have hard time. I say nonprofits have a hard time. Why would I say nonprofits have a hard time? Well, it's always hard for nonprofits in most cases. But on the flip side, I could see NFPs that leverage tech can be successful. I could also see in the nonprofit space that they might be able to compete better. So on the flip side, if I looked at the same kind of the same logic here, I would say NFPs have hard time to attract talent because if the price of salaries are getting so much higher, the ones that will be able to afford this will be like organizations that can like kind of scale their finances more easily. Many small businesses close, less craft, anything. Um, so hopefully, while I'm filling this out, you are filling yours out. Okay. So that you're looking and saying, hey, what are some of the trends? What are the scenarios? What are the alternate realities that I need to be aware of? You're going to notice that there are similarities between this world and that world. There's also going to be differences between this world and that world. Uh, Eldon asks for a workshop. Is it the facilitator's job to research and suggest the pestle factors, or is it the role of the facilitate? My answer is facilitate, but it depends if you ask for a facilitator or a consultant. Okay, we did this world. Let's do this world now. So this is the like alternate antithesis world. Of all of these, I can't figure out yet which one is the worst. So increasing cost of labor by 100% and zero acceptance of AI. I would say growing wealth gap, big companies grow, health crisis, humans versus robots. Um, you can name this world or name worlds. So like this would have a world to it. This world would have a title. This world would have a title, and this world would have a title. When we did this with the education and we mapped it 10 years out, one of the things that we looked at was, and one of the pervasive themes was global conflict. So if there's an increasing acceptance of AI in both of these worlds, I would probably say that there's like a technological arms race and high, and in this world, super high competition for tech talent. And then probably like increasing focus on STEM, something like this. In this world, and like I'm doing it kind of across all spaces. But we might in this world maybe, and again, it's only 2 years, leaning into artisanal things, focusing on passion versus profit, maybe. So the like distinction that I see between these two worlds is full acceptance of AI and increasing cost of labor by 100%. This would like everybody would be driven by dollars. We would turn into the matrix. The brass tacks would be super important in this world. People can actually like focus maybe more on living their life, more artisanal, more interpersonal. So this is a very human world, and this is a very technological world. Um, I could go deeper into this, but I also am like mindful of time. So the first step in this process, like we did, is to describe the worlds. So what does the world look like? The next step of this is to identify and talk about key success factors and challenges. Okay. So within your organization, for each of those worlds, write down your what from going on key success factors. What do we need to do to be successful in this world? And key challenges. What are some of the things that we're going to have to overcome? So if I was thinking about myself as let's call it a consulting business, I would say in this case, I want to focus more on the people culture side of it. I want to make sure that I am, growing sustainably. And I want to make sure that everything I'm doing is kind of consistent with all generations, all themes, all types of people, all learning styles. Whereas if I was a consulting business in this one, I would say, okay, I need to incorporate AI wherever I can. I need to manage data privacy. I need to, remove any manual processes or procedures. I want to cut down on human labor wherever possible. I need to like manage my margins or charge an exorbitant amount or something like that. So what you want to do is as you do broadly of each of these worlds, then you start getting deeper into each space. Uh, Questions about this process once you've mapped it out, and I'm going to bring up the slides again. Once you've mapped it out, what do you do to like dig deeper into it? So first we identify the driving forces, then we identify the critical scenarios. Next, we identified plausible scenarios. So the whole point of that is not to just pick, scenarios that likely won't happen. We want to look at things that are, possible, likely, so that we can try to figure out where, what we need to work on it. And then from there, we discuss implications and paths. So that means, what are the action steps? What are the things that we need to take? If this happens, where do we end up? So in this world, I think that we started off in World C. Can I see my cursor? Yeah, I can. We started off in World C, and the likelihood is that we're moving closer to World B. So if you remember, World C was 5% salary increases, no AI. I think we're moving into a world where there's more AI adoption and the gap and the cost of employees is going to increase significantly. So likely in this version of the scenario, I would say our company, SME Strategy, as well as your organization, is likely moving into A and B. At this point, don't see a world where we're entering into world D where there's no AI and 100% salary increases. I think those that leverage technology will do it successfully, and then they'll just charge more and make more. So, step by step, identify the driving forces, the PESTLE or whatever trends that you want to use to do this. Identify the two most impactful critical uncertainties. So, what are the ones that are most specific, most important to you and your organization? You can still bring those other trends into it. Develop the plausible scenarios, what might happen in each of those worlds. So, try to describe it. The further out you go time wise, the broader it is. And then in each of those scenarios, define what does success look like for us? What are some of the risks that we need to be aware of? And then align on the key success factors. What are the things that we need to do? And you're likely going to find that in multiple scenarios, there are overlapping or similar key success factors. Like, regardless if we go into world A or B, we need to be able to incorporate technology. We need to be able to reduce manual labor. We need to be equipping human beings for the differentiators that the world has. We need to be able to manage economic pressures consistently. So on step 3, you evaluate where you are and where you're heading. Are you still using the worlds you developed in step 2? Yes. So you're living in those worlds for the entire time. When we did this work most recently, I think we spent a full day digging into each of the worlds, the alternatives, the scenarios, and the key plans. When we did this in 20, and we've done it like other times, smaller times. I'm just thinking of the most recent. And then when we did this for the university, there was typically, 7 or 8 key themes that came up all the time. So we looked at all of the worlds and looked at, hey, regardless of what world it was, these were the things we needed to do as an institution to be successful. We needed to train for the future. We needed to have practical skills. We needed to develop our internal IP. We needed to consider that it was, well, both a global market, but that Canada had to kind of protect itself and look at itself, that it was going to be increasing price pressures, increasing value economies. People were going to have more transparency in terms of what they were looking for, what they needed to think about. So while it might seem very, very obtuse and grand, that there are likely more commonalities than differences. So before I move on to the next section, would just love to just check in with y'all. You still with me? Any questions? Does it all make sense? Is it helpful? If you just answer yes, I suppose that'll be an answer to all of the above, and that'd be just fine. And this isn't to solve anything per se, but it's really just getting you and your team grounded in terms of, okay, what is reality and what is possible? And how can we just take this uncertainty and try to take a breath on some solid ground, recognizing that we have no idea what's going to happen. In the education space with different departments of school, did you do this with each one or cross-functional group? Both. We did it with the different faculties within the school, and then we did it with different levels of stakeholder. Okay, so I'm going to move on to, and I'm going to do this relatively quickly. If you want an easier way to do this, and I'm going to call it easier in the sense that it's more simple, that if you pick some of the things that you're looking at, and let's say you use the trend analysis, but even if you didn't use the trend analysis, you say, okay, we know some stuff is going to change. And as a team, all we want to do is to figure out if this thing changes, what's the best case scenario for us? What's the worst case scenario for us? And what's somewhat manageable? So in the case of not-for-profit mission-based, all of our funding goes away, all of our federal funding goes away, that would likely be worst case scenario. And then that would have a series of knock on effects. If best case is none of our funding goes away, and in fact, we get more funding, you know, let's hope that one happens. But that might not likely happen. And then a manageable change might be something like, okay, we lose 50% of our funding. And so then it's a different way to do scenarios, but kind of in a more conventional sense where folks would just say, hey, best case, worst case, somewhere in the middle. Another way to think about it is like, let's say you look at the tariffs. Tariffs go in, and this is like manufacturing, and this is global, right? So we're not just talking Canada, US, Canada, Mexico, Mexico, US, but truly, truly global is, full tariffs. What does that mean? That's probably worst case. A maybe more likely case is maybe a 5 or 10% tariff. And then the best case is no tariffs at all. And you say, okay, given that, what does that mean? How does that impact us? Which of these worlds are we in? What are our key success factors? So you could take the same key success factors, risks, and success, outline risks. So what does success look like for us? Worst case scenario, we're still in business. That's success. But key risks, we might have to lay off half our staff. There's a manufacturing company in Montreal that proactively laid off 50% of their staff. We're going to see a lot of layoffs coming, I think, just through the uncertainty. So best case, manageable. Worst case, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so you can look at this and say, with our team, okay, what are the things that we're worried about? We have one or two or three things that we're really worried about right now, and let's play these out. And then the key term to think about is, hey, we want to play these out. We want to see as a leadership team, as a thought exercise. We want to try to look forward, pick a time frame, a year, 2 years, 3 years. For in this case, maybe a year is best because it'll support you in being more action oriented versus 5 years down the road. So I would think of this as more of like a tactical exercise, whereas the scenario planning could be more strategic. Best case, manageable case, worst case, and look at like the ranges of how bad it is. When we did this with in the state of Alaska education, we said, okay, COVID numbers are at this level, COVID numbers are at this level, COVID numbers at this level. At this level, we don't open schools, everything is remote. At this level, we monitor it closely, and some schools open and not, and green is kind of back to normal. And so it is like a threat level or whatever, threat level midnight, for those of you that know the reference, but really is a gauge to say, hey, where are we at in this? And then if you want to expand this further, then you just take the same PESTLE trends that we put in here, and then you apply them to each of your scenarios. Best case, worst case. This then starts making it like a bunch of other different variables, and the more variables there are, the harder it is to control. But if you're just looking for, hey, what are best case scenario for our organization? Nothing happens politically, economically, everybody makes more money. Socially, we've got tons of workers. Technologically, everybody, is adopting technology easily. They're buying into our software. Legal, it's an unconstrained environment, and environmentally, we're not having any environmental effects. So I did see there was a question. Love for you to put it in the chat because I may or may not have time to answer it. So step by step, identify driving forces, PESTLE or other trends. Identify two most impactful uncertainties. This is going back to the scenario planning. Develop and describe the plausible scenarios for each scenario. Define success, outline risks, and align key success factors. And then either of these cases, identify determinants or triggers that bring you closer to your best case, worst case, or business as usual. So it's really about setting a baseline to say, hey, if we start seeing adoption at this level, or if we start seeing it in the news daily versus weekly, or if this thing happens, we get closed due to snow, 2 or 3 days in a month, then we really need to start worrying about it. If every conversation that I talk to in sales is asking us about how we're AI enabled, or if every grant that we see coming out has diversity and equity inclusion as a requirement or data analysis as a requirement or something. You're starting to put guideposts to tell you, hey, what are the things we need to be aware of? How do we measure if we're in this scenario, in this scenario, in this scenario? And I would encourage you strongly to use numbers versus feelings. you know, if we have 15 or more days where the temperature is over 100, then we're definitely entering meltdown, right? If we've lost 10 of our last proposals because we didn't reference blank, then we should really consider incorporating that. If we start losing our like 10 staff members and the last 10 reasons was I got a better job somewhere else and they're paying us 50% more, then we say, oh, this is really like starting to sound off alarm bells in terms of what we need to be aware of. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left here. I just want to give you a takeaway in terms of how you can have these conversations with your team. So, for your team internally, as part of your strategy cadence, your communications cadence, how often should you review this current state? So, talk and say, how often should we look at this? Do we want to be able to monitor it weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly? For one of our organizations that was really trying to address a management sales change, they had meetings every 2 weeks. No, 3 meetings a week to talk about this issue because it was such a big issue. It was top priority for the organization in terms of how they're going to adapt to automation, how they're going to adapt technology. So agree on a cadence to review where you're at. And when I say our current state, it's our current state as a function of everything else. How are you going to manage these changes? So as you go through this scenario planning process, you're going to have a bunch of tasks that you're going to put in place, projects, etc. How do you stay on top of it? What is your formal process structure for project management, tracking, etc.? Who else needs to be brought into these conversations? So if we've had this conversation at the executive team level, do we need to get our middle managers? Do we need to get our board involved? Do we need to get our customers involved? Do we need to get our employees involved? And are these folks being informed? Hey, we're telling you, or consulted? What do you think? What are you seeing? As we talk about change management, as you're making these changes, to get buy-in early is the best idea so that you're not being faced with resistance. Hey, we're going to start changing these processes. Hey, we're going to start automating technology. Hey, we're going to start laying off staff because we have to. We'll explain to them why versus just doing it and then asking for permission after. From a change management perspective, being proactive, engaging with your stakeholders is always a best practice so that they have understanding, not just the what, but the why, and buy-in for the changes. No matter what happens, no matter what you do out of today's workshop or any other management conversation, any change that you have is going to have an impact on your stakeholders. And so if you want them to be part of the change, to come up with solutions versus coming to you with problems and reasons why you can't do it, bring them into the process. We're going to drop the link to the scenario planning workbook in a quick second. What I want to just highlight as we finish up here and before we get into Q&As is that all of these things are just conversations. Yes, it comes tactically, but in an organization that is complex, in an organization that has a lot of stakeholders, in an organization that's undergoing a lot of change, your best thing to do is stop, plan, get everybody together to make sure you're on the plan, and execute. You want to respond, and sometimes you need to react. But if you are an organization, you need to react and respond as an organization versus as an individual. So I'm going to give a couple minutes for Q&A here. I'm going to drop the link for the workbook in the chat. If you are looking for somebody to facilitate these conversations for you, we can do that. Visit us, smestrategy.net. We are going to be launching a couple things. One, we're going to be launching workshops to just be talking about some critical issues like this, such as scenario planning. We're also going to be offering a modified strategic planning process that really focuses on scenario planning. So if you want to do this with your team over a day, day and a half, we can certainly do that. I'm going to stop the slides while I pull up the Q&A. if you're still on the chat, I'd love to hear what you took away, what you learned from today. Just grateful for y'all to be here. I just appreciate you guys like listening and chatting and doing all that stuff. So let me just pull up this doc here for you so that you have it. So this is going in the chat here. Oh, Jen, you're amazing. Okay, let's do some quick Q&A before we go. Chat is showing disabled. We fixed that one. Oh, that's a great question. Cool. So Jen put that in the chat. I'm gonna drop it in the chat. If you have chat, you can put them in here. I don't know why I can't see them. I thought we had 4. No, we only have 1. Thank you. What is the secret to planning for uncertainties when your organization has several plans to align with? Uh, Lots of talking. Uh, Ideally, you align around one central plan, one central vision. And I didn't talk about the vision itself, but like actually saying, if this is where our organization wants to go, what does our successful future look like? And make sure that you're incorporating your vision within this process and saying, as an organization, this is our vision, this is our mission, this is what doesn't change. If this is where we want to go, how do we manage these uncertainties to keep the path going? So that you're always continuously moving closer to what it is, making sure that you have your endearing organizational principles withheld. Withheld? Maintained? Maintained is probably a better word for that one. Some thoughts about integration with a strategic plan. Yes, I mean, you could use scenario planning to create your strategic plan, but in principle, if you take scenario planning, the trend analysis is the same. You then have your vision, mission, values. That is kind of over the top. Then you have your strategic priorities. And in principle, if you've built out your scenarios well enough, you should have priorities out of it. I wouldn't necessarily use scenario planning as the best way to identify priorities, but it's very, very close because in our strategic planning process, which you can Google and find online, we look at risk identification. So we look at current state, we look at future state, we look at risks, then we look at priorities to mitigate risk. So priorities to mitigate risk is exactly the same as key actions to mitigate uncertainty. And then you just roll that out to your team through actions and tasks and guideposts and tracking and monitoring. So very, very close. But yes, should be alignment in principle. I got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Excellent. If you know anybody, I'll still answer any questions, but please feel free to share this. Like, I really try to give away all of our best stuff to help people. So if you liked it, I'd love for you to just put a share on social. Just say what you got out of it. Like, let's help some more people because people don't know. Like, we're only as big as our community, and we can only help some people. So I'd love it if you can tag me, Anthony Taylor. If you post it, say, hey, I was just in this webinar. It was pretty all right. Here's what I learned. Here's what I think organizations would consider, and like add value to your community. I know that maybe our slides weren't perfect, but really we just try to get this out as fast as possible, be as responsive as possible. And the video that I did in 2020 on scenario planning, we were in lockdown and I was in my apartment. And I said, hey, I just need to do this thing. It wasn't perfect, but just wanted to like roll it out. So I just appreciate y'all for being here. Again, happy to answer 1 or 2 more questions before I hop into my next workshop. But yeah, it's an iterative process. I hope you enjoyed today. I hope you got lots from it. I hope it helps you build resilience inside your organization. I hope it brings you certainty in an uncertain world. And I hope it brings you confidence by saying, even if I don't know what's happening in the world around me, I at least know that where I need to go, where we need to go as an organization so that I can support. If you're a nonprofit organization, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to have a one-on-one conversation with you to support this. I know it's a really tough time just with the state of things. I think nonprofits need to be able to like have more ownership of their finances. And I think that's going to be a key thing. So like social enterprises or thinking more like a business, even that's historically might not how it's been. But yes, we can do this in person or virtually. We're going to start doing more work in Europe and African countries now with time zones for some of these things. So, historically it's been Canada, US, but last year we did workshops in Europe, in person in Europe, and done work in Fiji and other places. But if you want to do this literally, if you're in another country, just let us know. We just have to figure out the time zone. So we have facilitators on the East Coast of Canada or East Coast of US. West Coast of Canada, West Coast of the US. So happy to find a time zone that works. Early morning for us, late afternoon for you, or evening for us, and sometime in the morning for you. Jay, it's okay. We'll get the webinar for you, but we can do some stuff. It does happen, but that's why we have it as a recording. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Again, please share with your networks, help them get the support. Let me know what you think about the download and template. And I look forward to seeing you in our next workshop. Y'all are awesome. Appreciate you. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't yet, and we will see you next time. But yeah, appreciate you. All right. Bye, everybody. Take good care.